Inihahandog ng UPCMC Departamento ng Broadcast at ng Universidad ng Pilipinas, Diliman. Kasama ang Philippine Studies Association at DZUP. Ang pagdiriwang ng ika-100 taon ng broadcasting sa Pilipinas.
Tell me where is our lies, and I'll tell you where
Hindi pa rin tatapos ang pangamba ng ilang mga taga.
articles are right.
You are choosing to come in at one of the worst times in the Philippines to be a journalist.
There's absolutely no reason for the reporter to keep quiet.
There are forces in society that have an interest in not exposing the truth.
Mga buwan ng Marso hanggang Mayo taong 2021. Maglilimang taon na si Duterte bilang presidente at ikalawang taon ng COVID-19 pandemic. Isa sa mga kursong itinuro ko at ni Ivy Claudio sa panahong ito ang Broadcast Journalism 130 na may pamagat na Issues in Broadcast News and Public Affairs. Sa tingin namin, lubhang napapanahon hindi lamang ang mga balita, kundi maging ang pagbabalita sa panahon ng isang kontrobersyal na Pangulo na lalong naging komplikado dahil sa krisis pangkalusugang hatid ng pandemya. Upang marinig namin at ng aming mga estudyante ang tayo o estado ng pamamahayag sa panahon ni Duterte, napagkasunduan namin ni Ivy na mag-interview ng mga journalist upang marinig kung ano ang mga opinyon nila tungkol sa bagay na ito at magpakwento ng mga karanasan nila bilang mamamahayag. Ako po si Betsy Enriquez at narito ang aking mga panayam. Ang tema ng unang episode ng mga panayam, ang kalagayan ng media sa Pilipinas sa panahon ni Duterte. Ang panauhin, si Binibining Maria Ressa, na sa palagay ko ay kilala ng marami sa atin kundi man ang lahat. Si Maria ang founder, Chief Executive Officer o CEO at presidente ng Rappler, ang kauna-unahang online news platform sa Pilipinas. Mahigit 35 years na siyang journalist. Kabilang yung maraming taon bilang Jakarta Bureau Chief ng CNN, habang nagsulat din para sa Wall Street Journal at Vice President for News ng ABS-CBN. Noong nakapanayam ko si Maria, hindi pa siya Nobel laureate. Pero bago pa man niya natanggap ang Nobel Peace Prize noong Disyembre 2021, ang dami na niyang award. Hindi lang dahil veterana na siya sa pamamahayag, kundi dahil sa pangunguna niya sa paglaban sa disinformation dito sa ating bansa. Kahit na kabi-kabila ang pang-uusig sa kanya ng pamahalaan, sa pamamagitan ng panghahabla sa kanya sa korte. Isa si Maria Ressa sa itinanghal na Time Magazine's 2018 Person of the Year. Una kong ipinakwento kay Maria yung mga karanasan niya na tumatagal na ng 35 taon at iniugnay niya ang kanyang paglalakbay sa development ng teknolohiya.
When I landed in the Philippines in 1986, it was this incredible euphoria of people power. And that really unleashed an energy that really is sorely missing 35 years later. And I would say that the journey I've traveled as a journalist has been marked by the technology that's accompanied it, right? So in PTV, Betsy and I worked together in 1986. I was like a little upstart kid that walked into PTV4, and I loved the newsroom. I loved the newscast. A live newscast takes so many different people to make it happen. It's like having an orchestra, but this is the first page of history. And it was incredible because, you know, Betsy would be sitting at the anchor's desk. Twink Makaraig was then, Judith Torres. And, you know, around them, there would be this maelstrom of just people running around, writing final script. And then I remember like one of the PAs running in, and Betsy would very calmly then read and then ad lib if it's breaking news, right? So there's this amazing thing with television in 1986. That's what I focused on after PTV. You know, I walked to the back, ABS-CBN, Cheche. I don't know if you guys remember in 1987. And the reason I went back over all of this, I'm trying to write a book, which is, you know, I will tap Betsy for that. But so in the back, ABS-CBN, by March 1987, it was back. They were splitting the compound. And I was so jealous of all of the equipment they brought in, of all of the facilities. So again, you go back to the technology, right? They had OB vans. In Channel 4, we had breaking down OB vans. We had vehicles that would go, like, would just stop running. And then after that, move forward. All right, so let me not, so broadcasting, right? The Philippines was the first to have satellite broadcasting in Asia, the first. Right. And I think, Betsy, this is what you focused on, because even in 1986, she was telling me the history, because I wanted to understand how broadcasting came about, how radio helped people power. Right. So hand in hand, information is power. Information spurs action. The coup attempt in 1989 was one of the first times I went live on CNN, you know, and we went from going live like once a month, because the cost of satellite to Atlanta was $10,000 per minute, to going live every hour on the hour by the time I left CNN in the end of 2004, because the cost of a satellite was $200, right? So all of a sudden, there's the satellite that came down in cost. And then my team in Jakarta was also an experimental team. We played with Toko, with ISDN. How can you broadcast in the middle of nowhere where there's no satellite without having to bring satellites? Like, I remember traveling with 21 cases because we would have to bring the satellite with us. And then the cell phone, right? The cell phone is incredible because I had one of the first ones. Well, before cell phone, fax, because I thought it was magical when I could, instead of reading it out on the phone to my editor in Atlanta, I could fax it, and then they would just fax back all of the corrections or whatever they wanted in it. Fax, cell phone. I remember the big cell phone. It's like, you know, you had to carry it. It was so heavy. Then Toko, then ISDN, then satellite per like $200 for a 10-minute feed. That stayed constant, and that still kept the mass media in the hands of relatively few, and people would say the wealthy, but it meant the gatekeepers could stay the gatekeepers. And I would say starting 2014, the journalists, the gatekeepers, lost their gatekeeping power to technology. And the first time we saw this, where we saw dual realities warring it out, was in the Ukraine in 2014. And that had impact on the world because it was, was this an annexation? This is Crimea, Russia coming into Crimea. Was it an annexation, meaning Russia was coming in and stealing the territory? Were they annexing it? Or were the people in that region asking for help? And so that dual reality started. Then in 2015, instant articles was rolled out on Facebook. At that point, Rappler, it was a Facebook partner. Right? We emerged. Our first broadcasting was really on Facebook in the end of 2011. And if its search was better, we may not have come out with our own website. And that was the beginning, I think, to me, of the end. And, this is why we are in this information dystopia, a dystopia that translates to real world impact, this is Oxford University, their computational propaganda research project said that as of this year, cheap armies on social media have rolled back democracy all around the world. So the problem we are living through in the Philippines is not unique in the Philippines. And I think that's when the gatekeepers shifted from journalists, news organizations, to tech. And tech essentially abdicated responsibility for facts.
Inungkat ko naman yung kondisyong politikal sa mga panahong nabanggit niya, na nag-umpisa sa pagbabalik ng demokrasya, ngunit nauwi sa muling pagkabigo nito.
In 1986, euphoria, right? The people power revolt in the Philippines sparked these democracy movements all around the world. In South Korea, in Václav Havel, Czechoslovakia. In fact, Václav Havel actually thanked Filipinos in 1987, I think. Then in Tiananmen Square in then you move forward, China, and then of course, look, in all of Southeast Asia, I covered the transition to democracy of a lot of these one-man rule autocratic style governments. And that went from Singapore, Malaysia, Mahathir to shifting of power. And I guess one of the things, Indonesia was the biggest one, the end of nearly 32 years of Suharto. Yeah. And one of the worst things that I have to say now is that at the tail end of my career, to see that pendulum of here is control, one man rule, we let it go in 1986, and it swung wildly. I mean, in the Philippines, you can say, and it's been used to describe us all the time, that we have a rambunctious press, that, we have press freedom, sometimes to the detriment. But I will say always one thing, our Constitution is patterned after the United States. The Bill of Rights is very clear. It defends freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And I have never, in all of the years that I've covered this country, seen it turned as upside down as it is today. Because if you look at Cory Aquino, was a housewife who was thrust into a position. If she was a more decisive leader, perhaps things could be better. There's a lot of what ifs and sliding doors. And what's interesting to me is every vote is always a reaction to the last president. After Cory, we swing the other way, and we go. I would think, the second time we had a woman president, we had great hopes. I certainly had great hopes for a very smart technocrat coming after Estrada, right? The populist after the general, Fidel Ramos, who was a reaction to Cory, right? So each one of these things, by the time we got to Gloria Arroyo, who was in power for 10 years, who was going to come next? It was, I guess, what I had hoped, and this is the way I described our country outside, is, the Philippines was trying to grow its institutions. Betsy pegged that in 1986. We were trying to institutionalize processes so that we can move away from patronage, feudalistic politics, and move it towards justice, right? A meritocracy, these values that some will say is an overlay on top of Filipino culture, right? But I don't really think that. I believe these are universal values. This is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the UN. Anyway, sorry, let me focus and just say last. It's sad for me that globally democracy is in retreat, and it definitely is in retreat. And what is happening in the Philippines today is heartbreaking. I think demands a lot more, not just from journalists and students of journalism, but from every Filipino. Because, maybe we took our freedoms for granted. Frankly, we did. And my generation, your generation, Betsy, we did something wrong. Because why is it that in 2016, a populist leader gets elected, Rodrigo Duterte gets elected with 39% of the vote. So, it's 39%. And then uses the levers of power, the levers of democracy to crumble it from within. Okay. You're going to have to do more if you want democracy in your future.
Itinanong ko kung ano ang epekto sa gawain ng mga journalist at binanggit niya ang karanasan niya hindi lamang sa Pilipinas.
In my case, I didn't feel it that much because I was covering all the countries in Southeast Asia, and I would fly in, cover the story. The government cared what I wrote, and I had access, but I never felt that I needed to be afraid for my safety, that I could be thrown in jail. I never felt the things I feel today. So there's that. I think the other part is I struggled all the time with local and global, right? Like Prof is homegrown, it's Filipino. And yet I also represented CNN. I became the face of CNN for, from 87 to 2005. So, and my audience, I needed to write the stories in a way that was both micro and macro. And in every country I was in, I needed to have truth for the country, for people in the Philippines, for people in Indonesia, for people in Malaysia, that needed to ring true to them. My case study, the micro, at the same time, the macro needed to be universal, needed to be understandable to Western audience, to a global market, because otherwise they don't care, right? That was my task. So that challenge, I think, made me a better journalist, made me a better storyteller. And that's the challenge for every journalist today.
Tinanong ko si Maria kung gaano kahirap maging journalist sa panahon ni Duterte.
It's creative destruction, right? Everything has been destroyed and it is time to create. So you are going to come in at a period of time when it is, let me speak from my case. I could go to jail for the rest of my life because I refuse to be intimidated or harassed, because Rappler continues to do stories that show corruption, that show ineptitude, that challenge power. We continue to hold the line, right? Because of that, Rappler has 9 cases. I have 10. I have 10 arrest warrants, at least. I think, no, so it's 9. I have 9 cases and Rappler has 8. That's shocking to me because the legal acrobatics that had to happen to even get these cases to court show me systemic problems, show me a weaponization of the law, show me that if you are really going to stay true to the mission of journalism, you will pay a cost. That's okay. It sucks that I came of age at this time, that I'm leading a news group at this time. I can't do anything else but what I'm doing. But for you as a student. The mission of journalism has never been as important as it is today. Think about it like that, because in the end, when it is a battle for facts, and make no mistake, that's exactly what it is. When it is a battle for facts, it is a battle for truth. When it is that, journalism becomes activism.
Problema nga ngayon na hindi na natin alam kung alin ang totoo o hindi sa mga nababasa natin sa social media. Iginiit ni Maria na kailangan itong pag-usapan.
In the end, for any meaningful human interaction, whether it's democracy or solving the problem of climate change, you're going to need to agree on a set of facts, right? I mean, can you imagine that we're even debating basic things like, well, how many people have been killed in the drug war? That's the first casualty in the battle for truth in our country.
Right.
That's part of the reason Rappler came under attack, because we just took the numbers that the police released and gave it back and said, but you said this, but you said this, but you said this. We refused to accept the shifting of the numbers that was happening in plain sight. And that's a problem. So look, facts, if you don't have facts, you can't have truth. If you don't have truth, you can't have trust. If you don't have these three, you cannot have a democracy.
Mukhang sa online media ang problema. Kaya tinanong ko kay Maria kung higit bang mapagkakatiwalaan ang traditional media na magsabi ng totoo. Oo naman daw, sa kabila ng ilang problema at nakatutulong ito sa demokrasya. Pero nang ihambing niya ito sa social media, partikular sa Facebook, ipinaliwanag niya kung paano nito sinisira ang katotohanan at ikinwento niya ang epekto sa kanya at sa Rappler.
Right? Like, journalists are far from perfect. News organizations are far from perfect. Definitely, corporate ownership has plays a hand. It's about power and money. But the reality is that I think the groups that have held the line in every country around the world where democracy is now at risk, the journalists, the news organizations have done that. So here's the reason why I think journalism must survive, and new journalists need to come in and look at the new landscape and say, here, because this phone gathers my data and it manipulates me, what are the new forms of storytelling I can use? What is the substance of the stories I will write, right? The problem is that the delivery platforms for news today, the world's largest, like the platform that delivers news today, the world's largest delivery platform for news is Facebook. And yet the very design of Facebook, of social media platforms, are actually designed, and there's a ton of research that shows this now, they're designed to spread lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than facts. That's a given. And it's in a Science magazine article that was released in 2018. An MIT professor and a former CTO of Twitter was part of this study. But then beyond that, the kinds of decisions these technology platforms have made actually divide us and radicalize us. And I'll explain that one with something very clear, right? Every social media platform uses friends of friends as part of its algorithm to grow. Right? So, Betsy, if I want you to grow your social media platform, I'm going to recommend algorithm. The algorithm will recommend friends of friends because they did A/B testing and found out that's the fastest way to grow. So here's what happened in 2016 after President Duterte was elected. And President Duterte, with his leadership style, played right into this friends of friends tearing of society. His leadership style is us against them. You're with us or against us. And that's his rhetoric, right? So what happened in 2016? Here we all were. We agreed on the facts in the middle. I can think regardless of, we don't have the CNN and the Fox that the US had. And even then we agreed on the facts, right? I'm holding my two hands together. So then after President Duterte took office, the pro-Duterte supporters grew their networks using friends of friends. They moved further right. The people who were anti-Duterte, moved further left. That's 2016. In 2017, the gap grew. In 2018, the gap grew further, 2019, and this chasm in between then allowed these groups who never heard each other, which is the premise of a democracy, to create their own realities, right? And the way algorithms worked is not only is it friends polarizing and tearing us apart, but it also recommended, and this is kind of which articles get recommended to you, which groups are recommended to you for joining. They brought you down the rabbit hole. So if you're pro Duterte and you clicked on a story that said Maria Ressa is a liar, the next step will be a story about Maria Ressa should go to jail. Then the next step will be Maria Ressa is in jail. None of these things are true. Online conspiracy theories spew out into the real world. An easier way of thinking about it, online violence leads to real world violence.
Isang bunga ng mga pangyayaring ito ay hindi na natin alam kung alin ang ating pagtitiwalaan. Tinanong ko si Maria kung paano kaya ito nangyari.
Trust became eroded because the very platforms that deliver the news are biased against facts. Remember, lies spread faster, they're more salacious. They anger you and you spread it because you're angry, right? So these platforms are biased against facts, biased against journalists. That's built in by design. Now you add players for power. And the easiest one, is the Russian influence or information operations, which is part of the Russian military doctrine. The goal, and they first experimented in the Ukraine, and then they experimented and did well in the US elections in 2016. The target was Hillary Clinton. I just interviewed her, and it's documented. December last year, the Senate released a 1,000-page report that showed Russian information operations attacking Americans, influencing Americans. And here's the tactic. This is the same in the Philippines, and I'll bring it to the Philippines after. What they do is take a fracture line of society, right? Black Lives Matter. And they pound it until it splits open. And that's what we've seen in the United States. Look, it's also successful. If you think about it, President Trump actually gained more votes from 2016 to 2020. He gained more votes, right? And people came out and stormed Capitol Hill. This is not going to go away anytime soon. Think about it as an information ecosystem. And while we're fighting the coronavirus in the real world, in our information ecosystem, we are fighting a virus of lies. And when you are infected, so closed system, the virus of lies, it infects real people because it plays on our fears, right? Infected with the virus of lies, real people whose worldviews shift. And when those worldviews shift, this is like having a drug problem. It's going to take years. They become impervious to facts. And that's part of the reason for the tearing apart. Let's take it to the Philippines. Part of the reason families can't agree, when families are split apart, is because we are on Facebook. 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. This year, we are social and Hootsuite as YouTube has actually gone 1% ahead in terms of, so that means all of us are also on YouTube. These two platforms treat lies and facts exactly identically, meaning as data, right? So That's the crucial core problem. Journalists will take out lies. They won't go into the information ecosystem while we were the gatekeepers. But tech platforms actually not only let them in and treat them equally, they give the lie preferential treatment because it retains your attention longer and better because it's about your emotions, right? So I'm telling you this because you have to understand that a lot of the issues of trust are not in the hands of journalists. And in many ways, I'm foolish for the battle that I'm in right now because I'm a target of attacks every day on social media. Not as bad as, say, Lenny Robredo, right? Or Risa Ontiveros or Laila de Lima. These women are constantly attacked minute per minute. And there's no real way to fight back because, well, there is no real way unless you're willing to lose your morals. We're not in Rappler, so we don't. But what we do is we keep doing our jobs. So here's your biggest challenge as a journalist today. You have to draw the line for yourself, and it is a moral line. How are you going to deal with the very platforms that distribute the news? Because the problem of trust, the erosion of trust, especially in the Philippines, is not the fault of the journalists. It's actually literally, regardless of, like, let's say from the best to the worst, right, of journalism, there's still a spectrum. But in general, we didn't manipulate our people. We couldn't. We didn't have the ability to do that. Here's the biggest problem of your generation, right? The people who are watching. And an American biologist from Harvard said this, and he said this so well. His name is E.O. Wilson, and he studies emergent behavior ants. He studies ants. And what he said is that the greatest crisis is going to be Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. This is why I think trust is not within our control as journalists. But that's not an excuse to be a bad journalist, right? You still need to, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to tell better stories, to actually realize that in the new world, stories, here's what we've done in Rappler. We build communities of action. The reason I decided Rappler and technology would go hand in hand is that with CNN, I was throwing stories into a black hole in a global community. But here in the Philippines, we had hoped that technology could help jumpstart development. The technology would give more power to the people. I drank the Kool-Aid. But the greed of the social media platforms, the business model of the social media platforms, a book by Shoshana Zuboff, Harvard emeritus professor emeritus, wrote a book called Surveillance Capitalism. And that one lays out that part of the reason facts and lies are treated the same way in data is because the lies keep your attention longer and keeps you scrolling longer on your phones.
May pag-asa bang mabago ito?
What we do today will determine that. And I think for the Philippines, we are looking at the abyss. It's a combination of local and global. And that's why I'm still happy. Betsy, I haven't changed that much because
I can see that.
It's an exciting time, right? If we look at the entire information ecosystem and realize that Rodrigo Duterte took advantage of something companies in Silicon Valley, in the United States, American companies gave, right? So in that sense, I look at this as there are three pillars, and I think you should think about this for journalism. These are the three pillars of Rappler: technology, journalism, and community, right? My elevator pitch when we started Rappler in 2012 was that Rappler builds communities of action. The food we feed our communities is journalism. That's the way all three come together. And think about it like this. In order to have communities of action, you need to have a shared set of facts. You need to have a shared set of actually, you need to have a shared reality. These shared facts lead to reality, right? And once you decide on what the reality is, then you can begin to solve problems. I think that, and I have done a lot more work in the last year outside, demanding that these social media platforms be regulated. Even though Rappler and I, we're partners of Facebook, right? We're one of two Filipino fact-checking partners. Vera Files and Rappler are the two. But if the guardrails are not put on the social media platforms, and they know this, they have the data, but they are going to have the political will to say, we will save society, we will save democracy, but we will make less money. They're going to have to make that call, diba? That's really the reality. So look, I mean, don't be depressed by it. You have to understand it, and then you have to take the mission of journalism and be clear-eyed about the world you're stepping in, and realize how important the work is, because the facts determine everything.
Para sa aming mga nagtuturo ng mga estudyanteng nagbabalak maging media workers, may nararamdaman kaming pag-aalala na para bang hindi ito mabuting panahon ng media work. Kaya hinilingan ko si Maria ng pampalakas ng loob ng mga future journalist.
It's up to you to build it. You know, I mean, we built Rappler from nothing. Next year, we're going to be 10 years old. And imagine what the Philippine media landscape would look like if there was no Rappler. We're very small, right? So what you can imagine in your head, where journalism should go, you will need to create it. Here's the last part I would add to all of that, right? I use the phrase creative destruction, but I've said this, I think, even when I came home to join ABS-CBN. The quality I look for more than anything is courage. Because if you're afraid of it, then maybe, you know, you'll wind up moving somewhere else. You have to kind of understand the role you play as a journalist. And to the real journalists, your teachers, I know both Betsy and Data. You know, I don't know Ivy, but, you know, you're with Betsy, so I'm sure. It's almost like a religious calling. It is. That's the reason why so many of us have given our lives to this, right? And I mean, you know, Amal called me on Christmas Eve to tell me that I could go. This was like 2019. So Christmas Eve 2019, Amal calls me, and she had just gone over all of the documents. And she said, Maria, you can go to jail for 63 years. Now it's more than 100 years. And I was like, are you giving me this for Christmas? Oh, you know, it punches you in the gut. It punches you in the gut. And then you just go, okay, will I let it scare me? If I did, then I wouldn't. Think about it like this. Right now, whether I go to jail or not, I think depends on what I do right now as a journalist. It's that cause and effect. What you do as a journalist will change your society, will make Filipinos care or not care, right? But you have to find that courage inside yourself, the values of why, and then look at the format and substance of the journalism.
Habang nilalabanan natin ang coronavirus, nilalabanan din ang virus ng disinformation o fake news o kasinungalingan. Sabi nga ni Maria Ressa, ang panawagan niya, ipagtanggol ang katotohanan, yung katotohanang mapaniniwalaan nating lahat dahil dito nakasalalay ang demokrasya. Sa susunod na panayam, tampok si Howie Severino ng GMA tungkol sa pag-produce ng mga programang public affairs. Ako po si Betsy Enriquez at ito ang aking panayam kay Maria Ressa.
Ang programang ito ay hatid sa inyo ng UPCMC Departamento ng Broadcast at Universidad ng Pilipinas, Diliman, kasama ang Philippine Studies Association at DZUP, sa pagdiriwang ng ika-100 taon ng broadcasting sa Pilipinas.